You've probably heard that classic economics question. Why is a diamond worth so much more than water when you need water to live? The answer feels obvious, right? But what if I told you the theory behind that answer has this incredibly political backstory? We're going to dig into the hidden history of how the very meaning of value got turned completely on its head.
So, where does this story kick off? Well, it all starts with what you might call a quiet revolution. See, back in 1871, an economist named W.S. Jevons comes out with this radical statement. He basically says, value doesn't come from how much work you put into something. Nope. He argued it comes from something totally different, utility. And as we're about to see, that one little idea was basically a wrecking ball to 100 years of economic thinking.
Okay, so what is this utility he's talking about? It's actually pretty simple. It's just the satisfaction you get from something. You know, that feeling when you have a great cup of coffee or how much you want that new phone. It's totally personal, totally subjective. But here's the kicker. Making that feeling the bedrock of all economics, that was a massive, radical move. Because it was replacing a much older idea and a much more, let's say, dangerous one.
Right. So before everyone started talking about utility, the big thinkers of economics, the classical guys, they had a totally different take on what value was. Let's jump back in time a bit and check out the world they built, because understanding that is key to seeing why it all came crashing down.
And man, the difference between these two ideas is just night and day. On one side, you've got the classical economists, guys like Ricardo. For them, value was objective. It was real, you could measure it. It was based on the amount of labor it took to make something. Simple. But for the new kids on the block, the neoclassical thinkers, value was all subjective. It wasn't in the product, it was in your head. It was all about what the consumer felt, a complete 180.
And this wasn't some polite academic disagreement either. Jevons basically came in and declared the old theory dead on arrival. He's like, the labor you spent on something yesterday, it's gone. It's a sunk cost. It has zero influence on its value today. He said the only thing that matters is the satisfaction you think you're going to get from it. Which begs the question, right? Why were they so desperate to kill off this old labor theory? And this, right here, is where we get to the real heart of the story. You see, the classical labor theory of value wasn't just some dusty old concept in a textbook. By the middle of the 19th century, it had become something else entirely. In the eyes of the people in power, it had become socially dangerous.
The problem wasn't that the math was wrong or anything like that. No, the problem was where the logic led you. It was a political problem. Because think about it. If all value comes from labor, well, that line of thinking starts to ask some really uncomfortable questions about where things like profit and rent actually come from.
It set off this kind of dangerous chain reaction of logic. Step 1. Okay, labor creates all value. Got it. Step 2. If that's true, then profit for the capitalist and rent for the landlord, well, that can't be new value. It has to be a chunk taken out of the value the workers already created. And that leads to step 3, the explosive conclusion. Profit and rent are, by definition, exploitation. I mean, you can see why this idea started giving a lot of people a major headache.
And this wasn't just some fringe theory either. Even one of the new neoclassical economists, John B. Clark, basically admitted how high the stakes were. He said if this charge of exploiting labor was proven true, every good person should become a socialist. The labor theory was basically handing ammunition to anti-capitalist movements, and for the establishment, that charge of exploitation absolutely had to be shut down. And things were only getting more intense because capitalism itself was changing. You know, in the early days, a capitalist was often the guy running the factory, the manager. So you could argue his profit was just a kind of wage for his work. But as big corporations started to pop up, the owners weren't managers anymore. They were just investors, people who collected profits because they owned property. This made that whole exploitation argument sound, well, a lot more convincing.
So here's the situation. The entire foundation of economics is starting to crack under all this political pressure. A new foundation was needed, and fast. And that's when we get what historians call the marginal revolution, a movement that didn't just patch up the old system, but quietly and totally rebuilt economics from scratch.
It seems the time was just ripe for a new idea. It's kind of wild, actually. In the early 1870s, you have 3 different economists, Jevons in England, Menger in Austria, and Walras in Switzerland, all working completely separately. And yet, they all land on the exact same core idea. Value comes from utility at the margin.
That's the satisfaction you get from just one more unit of a thing.
But if you're going to reinvent value, you also need to reinvent cost. And the solution they came up with was pretty clever. It was a new concept called disutility. So now, cost wasn't something objective, like hours of labor. Nope, cost became a subjective feeling too. It was the pain of doing work, or the sacrifice of saving your money instead of going out and spending it.
And this new way of thinking changed everything. Suddenly, wages weren't about what a worker needed to survive. They were a fair payment for the unpleasantness, the disutility of their labor. And profit? That wasn't exploitation anymore. It was the rightful reward for the disutility of saving and taking a risk. And just like that, poof, the whole messy moral problem of exploitation, it just kind of vanished into thin air.
Now, you gotta understand, this wasn't just a simple patch or a minor fix. This redefinition of value and cost fundamentally changed how we even imagine the economy. It was no longer this messy battleground between different social classes. It became something else, something cleaner, more predictable, more scientific. It became like a machine.
Walras, one of those pioneers, put it perfectly. He said the goal was to make economics just like physics. Think about that. If you just assume the market is perfectly frictionless, full of perfectly rational people, well then you can strip out all the messy social and political stuff. You can analyze the economy with the pure, clean precision of mathematics.
And honestly, this is pretty much the economic worldview we still live with today. The focus is no longer on groups or classes, it's on the individual. Prices aren't a site of conflict, they're just the neutral outcome of supply and demand, this elegant balance between utility and disutility. The big questions in economics stopped being about who gets what and started being about how to allocate resources most efficiently. And that, right there, is really the key takeaway. This big shift from objective labor to subjective utility, it gave us a whole new way to understand capitalism, a way that was, well, politically sanitized. It wasn't some grand conspiracy, but it was an incredibly convenient solution to what had become a very, very serious political problem.
So that leaves us with one last thing to think about. We've just seen how the common sense economics of the 19th century was totally shaped by the social and political crises of that era. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the unseen forces, the political pressures, and the blind spots that are shaping the economic ideas we all just take for granted today?